Rand. Mariki's parties tonight.
The pay with them, will it be extra?
No, Thandi, just do it.
Imagine your mother sees Thandi is a domestic worker in 1973. She goes into work one day and the madam tells her she has to stay late. Again. No extra pay, no choice. It's the third time this week. And while she works into the night, you're at home taking care of your siblings, waiting for her to come back. Back in the day, this was the reality of thousands of women across South Africa. This is how domestic workers were treated. And for many domestic workers today, not much has changed. Welcome to the Legacy of Domestic Work. Today, we're exploring the hidden lives and hard truths of domestic work under apartheid and how so little has changed since then. My name is Nthabeleng Phayane, and I'm with
Lulah Mapiye.
And Lulah, do you realize that Thandi's story is just a drop in the ocean when it comes to the reality of what would happen to domestic workers during apartheid?
Absolutely. Today we're exploring one of the most powerful and hopeful lines from the 1955 Freedom Charter: there shall be work and security. This wasn't just a political slogan, it was a vision for a South Africa where everyone's labor was valued and protected. But for many, that vision was a world away.
And that's such a fundamental promise, isn't it? And for a long time, a huge group of people in this country, that promise was a distant dream. Even during the 1973 Durban strikes, when they joined hundreds of workers demanding better wages and working conditions, it was definitely a powerful reminder that most overlooked workers could rise up and be heard.
It really was. The very idea of work and security for a domestic worker was non-existent. They weren't seen as employees in the formal sense. They were maids or servants. That term alone really tells you everything about the power dynamics. It was a system built on racial and economic exploitation.
And speaking of that history, did you know that domestic work wasn't always a female profession in South Africa?
Really? Tell me more. I always think of it as being primarily women.
Well, during the colonial and early apartheid eras, especially from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century, many men worked as domestic servants. They were known as houseboys and were particularly common in the Natal and Witwatersrand regions. So as men were increasingly pushed toward the mining industry, domestic work became more feminized, and by the 1960s, it was overwhelmingly a female profession, a trend that continues to this day.
Wow, that's a fascinating detail. A recent report by Sweep South, a South African on-demand online platform for domestic cleaning services, gardening, maintenance, etc., recently released their 6th annual report documenting the pay and work conditions of domestic workers. In this report, it is highlighted that 94% of domestic workers are women and only 6% are men, which proves that domestic work is now a female-dominated industry. And the brief history you just shared right now shows that no matter who was doing the work, the conditions were the same: pitiful wages, long hours, and no legal protection.
Exactly. And you'd hear stories of 12-hour days, sometimes more, with no proper rest breaks or time off. And you can absolutely forget about paid leave or holidays. Those were completely out of the question.
And I think the most frightening part was the complete lack of a safety net. If a domestic worker lost their job or if they got sick and couldn't work, there was nothing. They were completely excluded from any form of social security. They had no access to unemployment benefits, workmen's compensation, or any other support system that protected other workers. The system was designed to keep them dependent and vulnerable.
Yes, definitely. It was a perfect storm of exploitation. And this is why the post-apartheid changes were so significant.
So that was then. But the dawn of democracy was supposed to change all of that. And it did. But it was a long and difficult fight, right?
Yes, it was. The change didn't happen overnight, though. It was driven by the tireless work of activists and unions. Activism which grew stronger in the 1980s. A key turning point was the formation of the South African Domestic Workers Union in 1986. This union was instrumental in organizing domestic workers and bringing their struggle to the forefront of the anti-apartheid movement. There has since been more unions that represent the domestic workers. For example, the South African Domestic Service and Allied Workers Union. However, the exact number of unions that represent domestic workers in South Africa is unknown.
And the new union fight and activism led to some really significant legal changes, that really gave domestic workers the right they deserved. The Basic Condition of Employment Act and the National Minimum Wage Act now explicitly include domestic workers.
So, we went from no rights to having a legal framework that guarantees things like a maximum work week of 45 hours with overtime pay.
To add to that, the law now says employers must register their domestic workers for the UIF. That means if they lose their jobs, they have a fund to fall back on. It's that security part of the Freedom Charter promise really being finalized.
And of course, the introduction of a minimum wage for domestic workers. It puts a legal floor under their pay. So that's the law on the books. We've come a long way from the days of apartheid. But how does that reality play out today?
That's really the big question, because despite all those legal victories, we know there's a huge gap between the law and what's happening in homes across the country.
Absolutely. Many domestic workers are still paid below the minimum wage. They're not registered for the UIF, and their working hours often exceed the legal limits. It is quite a challenge for many to register under unions as they do part-time domestic work. And unions need a minimum of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, in order to register you. And this is regardless of how much you make. Another issue is that as of March 2025, the national minimum wage is 28 Rand 79 cents per hour.
That is really concerning, Tabi. No wonder most domestic workers, according to the Sweep South, are suffering from mental health issues and debt. When you look at the rising cost of living in South Africa, the price of electricity, transport, and food, that wage is really not enough to lift a family out of poverty.
Definitely. And many domestic workers are feeling the pinch of inflation, and their wages just aren't keeping up. The economic downturn after COVID-19 also led to many losing their jobs. So while we can look back and see how far we've come in fulfilling the Freedom Charter's promise of work and security, the journey isn't over yet. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Speaking of COVID-19, Tabi, I don't know if I ever narrated to you the story of how I was living with my aunt, who is a domestic worker during COVID-19.
Yeah.
So basically what was happening was that we were living with her and she didn't know whether or not her bosses were going to pay her.
Bosses, you mean like more than one?
Yes, she had two bosses because she worked 4 days a week for one boss and 3 days a week for the other boss.
Okay.
And she had no formal contract with either one of them.
She would basically go around from house to house.
Yes, something like that. So she would choose days like maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for one boss, and the other days in between for the other boss. So, because of no formal agreement, she didn't know whether or not they're going to pay her during those 27 days of the first lockdown, because that's close to a month. And we did not know whether after those 27 days, she would still be needed to stay at home, like and not come to work, because, no one knows when the pandemic was going to end.
COVID was definitely a confusing time.
It was such a confusing time, and it led to us having to sacrifice on downsize on the meals that we would take at home. So instead of taking 3 meals a day, we had to cut to 2. And on those 2, so for us to sort of be filled with just those 2 meals, we had to wake up a little later and sleep a little late as well.
Okay, and I think it just goes back to the fact that domestic workers were not paid enough, meaning that you guys had to cut down on your meals.
Yes, not being paid enough to be able to save, which is a huge issue, because like I said, the issue, like we were talking about, like the issue of debt, it's a huge issue with domestic workers because they don't make enough. As a result, they have to borrow to
be
make
able to
sure that there is
survive.
more food at the end of the money, but before the month ends. That's like a confusing thing, but yeah.
So tell me, Lulah, what ended up happening to your aunt those few weeks after lockdown? Did her bosses ever pay her?
Oh, actually, I'm glad that you asked that question because I don't know if I should even say luckily for her, but her bosses paid her. They did give her the same amount they would pay her if she were to come to work because they also got paid from their companies. So I don't know what would have happened if they had different hearts from the ones that they had, or maybe if they were not paid themselves, what would have then happened to us? Because if you think about it, the most stressful thing was that the fact that she was not only looking after herself with that money, she was looking at 3 adults. It was myself, my cousin, and this other lady who was helping her out at home.
Yes.
So she also had someone helping her out.
I think it just goes to show that a lot of domestic workers are the main breadwinners in their households. So the pressure of providing often falls on their shoulders. And also, the fact that her employers were so compassionate at that time was so important.
Yes, it really was. Also, another thing we could zoom in on is the fact that my aunt is just one individual. What of other domestic workers? Domestic workers get mistreated and abused. Because of such reasons, some people were just not paid. The situation is bad out there and working conditions are still bad.
Yeah, the working conditions are really bad. And not many domestic workers were as lucky as your aunt during the pandemic. Her story is the reality for so many. And it shows that we still have a long way to go in ensuring fair wages and good working conditions, especially under the economic conditions that we're living in right now.
Yes, of course. It's more than just a struggle, Nthabi. This sector is actually shrinking. The earlier mentioned Sweep South reports showed that before COVID-19, there were 1.2 million domestic work opportunities in South Africa. That number has now dropped to about 850,000 and is still trending downwards.
That's a really devastating number. But what does that mean for the workers who rely on this income, though?
It means a lot of people have lost everything. This report also found that 21% of domestic workers have lost all employment, while 36% have lost some form of work. Considering that most of those workers are breadwinners for their families, the impact is severe. We are seeing it in the rise of mental health issues. There has been a 16% decline in mental health among domestic workers in the past year alone.
So the economic pressure is directly linked to an emotional and mental crisis. But is there a way out, though? I read that some companies are trying to move domestic workers into what's being called the care economy.
Yes, that's right. It's a very big pivot, if you think about it. Instead of just focusing on cleaning, there's just a push to train workers in specialized fields like elder care and childcare. The market for these services is projected to be worth billions, and the hope is to create a new, more formal career path for these women and men.
It's a fascinating idea, really, taking the nurturing and caring skills they already have and moving them into a more secure, formalized industry. Is this why some domestic workers are even looking to work overseas?
Exactly. The promise of higher pay, job security, and safer working conditions abroad is a huge draw. It's not just doctors and accountants leaving anymore. It speaks to how dire the situation is here when domestic workers are looking for opportunities in other countries.
I think it just goes to show how urgent the situation really is. We need to find a way to make the promise of the Freedom Charter a reality.
I agree. When we reflect on the promise of the Freedom Charter, we see that the struggle for work and security for domestic workers is a testament to how far we've come, but it's also a stark reminder of how far we still have to go.
The Freedom Charter gave us a blueprint for a just society. Its power lies not just in what it says, but in the work we all continue to do to fulfill its promises. The story of domestic workers is a powerful example of that. It calls on all of us to ensure every South African's labor is valued and their security is guaranteed. Speaking of labor that is valued, we wanted to see how this history has shaped our lives today. So, we went to the streets of Johannesburg to ask people one simple question. What is the biggest role a domestic worker has played in your life? And here's what people had to say.
So I grew around a very unsafe neighborhood. So we had a domestic worker around, say, 2014. I was in grade 3, right? So school was like a walking distance. So she'd always have to walk with us to school and come back. So there was this one afternoon where I just decided to walk alone and come back home, and that stressed her out a lot. And from there, I think that's when I realized how safety is a big thing for children. So I guess in that way, she did impact my life.
And that's quite an interesting recording, isn't it?
It is.
Because actually, domestic workers in this instance are going beyond just being for the household activities, but taking kids to school as well, making sure that they arrive there safe and get back safe.
I think it also just shows how domestic workers aren't just that, working in the house, but they are our protectors as well.
Outside. Yeah, true. Let's listen to another recording.
Yeah, they did play a big role in my life. Like, they would do everything for us. Like, if they weren't there, I don't think I would be able to get to school, like from primary school to high school, because they'd have to like wake us up, they'd make us breakfast, they'd cook, clean, everything. And I remember also there's this one, I forgot her name unfortunately, but I remember when I got my period, I was like stressing out and I was calling my mom and she was there and I was like, thank goodness. Because yeah, but no, they really, that's support that you need. Yeah.
Truly, imagine being on your period for the first time and your mom is at work and you have no one else to help you.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I'm just glad that she had someone there to help her.
And also, she said the same thing that was said by the first speaker, that thing of being able to have a domestic worker in the house to take you guys to school, prepare for you. And I can just imagine how early she had to get there if she had to come from like a kasi to the place. And for some people, I think they just stay in.
And I think it was just a blessing for her to have someone around at such a vulnerable time in her life. Okay, and here's the next one.
Okay, so I've had positive experiences with domestic workers. I mainly had them when I was younger, and my mom was quite busy with work and my dad was quite old, so it was helpful to have someone around the house to look after me and to clean and stuff like that. But also I really like bonded with a lot of my domestic workers. We would talk about like personal things. I also got to learn a bit of isiXhosa from them because we don't speak it at home. So it was nice to just learn different languages from them and, you know, different ways of living and stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow, that was a really good one. I think this was just a reminder to show that housekeepers are not just people in your house who are working for you. They can be a friend to you as well. And also the fact that she was taught a different language by a housekeeper just shows that housekeepers can also be your teachers as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, because another issue we tend to have with a lot of people that grew up in like enclosed families and neighborhood, and they never got to experience life or hear about a life other than their own. They tend to be judgmental towards people who live a different life, even when they go outside, you know, like maybe they're home to a university space and they're like, why does that person behave differently? But if you have someone like a domestic worker who lives a different life from a different class to yours, you sort of like get it. You understand.
Yes, you get exposed to different cultures, different languages, just a different life to yours.
From a very early age. Yes. And it makes you a less ignorant adult.
Yes,
later
and just
on in
more
life.
aware of how other people are living. Definitely. And here is the next clip for you.
I have a helper at home. Mostly she was for the kids, but she becomes family. She becomes more part of a family because she's always with the kids, especially when we're not at home. But my helper is very good. She not only looks after the kids, she loves them as her own. She makes sure that the house and everything is taken care of. Actually, we are free and comfortable to live in my house. She's the best.
Wow. I think it also just shows, the one we heard just now shows that Domestic workers can also be your family. This man was just talking about how this lady was helping his family, looking after the kids, but also how she also feels like family when she's around.
Yeah, that's very true. And he mentioned something that's very important. You know how he said when we are at work. So domestic workers play a huge role in terms of supporting the formal sector. So a lot of people who work in the formal sector make use of domestic workers who are like their informal like employees to look after their children so that they can work in the formal sector. So it's all coming together to boost our economy as a country.
It definitely does. And this is the last clip that we have for you.
She makes life around the house easier. I don't have to clean my room. I don't have to do my laundry. I don't have to wash the dishes. It's just a great blessing to have her.
Wow, listening to that last clip, I think it just shows that when there is a housekeeper in the house just taking care of the household chores, doing all the laundry, it shows that children are able to be children at home and they don't have to do all those chores like washing dishes and doing laundry. I think this young man was actually very lucky to have their housekeeper around.
Indeed, you could tell from his voice that he was so happy to share that information. Because just being a child is just important. If you're a child, be a child, enjoy being a child. And I think it's incredible to hear how deeply rooted these relationships are, isn't it? From a second mother to a trusted confidant, domestic workers hold a special place in so many homes.
Exactly. They are more than just people hired to clean, cook, or even watch over children. They are the backbone of a lot of families. But as we heard, that emotional connection doesn't always translate into work and security as the Freedom Charter promised.
But then there's a painful irony in that. They pour in so much love and care into other people's children becoming a second mother, while their own children at home are being cared for by someone else. The love they give is immeasurable, but it comes at a huge personal cost to their own families.
Yes, it does. They sacrifice so much for us daily, and I hope they know how much we appreciate them. We just want to leave our listeners with one question. What role do you play in your domestic worker's life to fulfill the promise of the Freedom Charter?
That's really something to think about, hey? That's all we have for you today. You've been listening to The Legacy of Domestic Work, an episode of the We Should Be Writing podcast. This podcast is a product of the Honours in Journalism and Media Studies program at the Wits Centre for Journalism in Johannesburg. Our producers, editors, and show hosts were Lulah, Mapiye, and Nthabeleng Phayane. Our theme music was composed by Stoic, and our graphic design was by Ekta Sabrim and Anganathi Jack. A special thanks to all our interviewees and voice actors for the narrated scenes. Additional episode music credits and info are available in our show notes. On all social media, we are at Wits Vuvuzela, and you can see more of our work on witsvuvuzela.com.